Magnifico rettore professore Roberto Tottoli, signor sindaco professore Gaetano Manfredi, signor direttore del Dipartimento di Scienze Umane e Sociali professore Paolo Mulzer, carissimo professore Giuseppe Cataldi, carissimi professori tutti, caro ambasciatore Longar, caro console Franzoni, autorità, signore e signori. Buonasera a tutti i presenti e grazie per un'accoglienza così gentile e cordiale. Now I will continue in English because my Italian is not as good as it sounded right now. Good evening to all of you present and thank you for such a nice and friendly reception. I hope that all of you have lived and are living a decent life. Perhaps a humble one, but safe. Feeling that in difficult times you will not be alone. Because this is the world you grow up in. A world that more than ever before in history has tried to foster certain fundamental values. It has also raised us to remain vigilant in protecting and upholding the fundamental achievements of civilization, including the rule of law, justice, and the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. I hope that all of you are alarmed by how easily and repeatedly the fundamental rules of international law are being broken, coupled with aggression as a means of advancing foreign policy interests. Tens, hundreds of thousands of dead soldiers and civilians, destroyed infrastructure, and irreparable damage to nature due to wars. All of this is becoming irrelevant at a time when the powerful are again able to exert their will over others just because they can. I hope that all of you are horrified to realize how little another person's life can mean. The Democratic Republic of Congo, Palestine, Rwanda, Srebrenica, Sudan. These are only some of the places where we have witnessed brutal killings, often in ways that only can be conceived by a twisted human mind. And all of it despite the indescribable horrors of World Wars I and II that our ancestors swore would never be repeated, proclaiming that lasting world peace would finally prevail. I hope that all of you are afraid for the future of our environment on the only livable planet that we have. And ladies and gentlemen, there is no planet B. We have no longer live in the age of climate change. We live in the age of climate crisis. And yet to impact on our planet and lives is grossly underestimated by far too many politicians. They are supported by powerful individuals and interest groups whose financial interests would be threatened by any meaningful climate agreement. And ladies and gentlemen, when I do have lectures for young people in the presidential palace or at faculties in Slovenia and abroad, I often say this sentence. Do you know how many countries we do have in the world? 193 are members of the United Nations. There are 206 members of the International Olympic Committee. So that means that we do have 206 prime ministers, 206 presidents, and some kings and queens. That means 412 individuals with power who have the obligation to serve and take care for 8 billion people. Are we aware of that obligation? I have to be honest, not all of us. I hope that many of you are aware that the gap between the rich and poor is widening. The concentration of wealth in the hands of few individuals and multinational corporations may be the major obstacle to ensuring that people around the world have equal opportunities in an era of rapid technological advancement, especially through accessible education. And I don't have to mention Afghanistan and girls who do not have rights anymore, the right to be educated. I hope that all of you are worried by the changes happening in the international community. Along with the rivalry between superpowers, new players are stepping into the arena of international relations. Ultra-wealthy individuals with incredible influence, individuals who can purchase media spaces or even directly support their chosen political options around the world as easily as buying ice cream for a child. All this is fueling discomfort, uncertainty, and confusion among people. And perhaps that is why we remain mostly passive observers of all these events that are becoming an increasingly immediate threat. We fail to use the only power we truly have, the power of words, as if we did not believe in it, as if we had forgotten that it is the power of words that inspires people to act and to create a world that ensures our fundamental rights and security. But we must not accept the rule of silence, not among our friends, not in our societies, not in our countries, and certainly not in international relations. I believe we can all agree that every human being has the right to live in a safe, clean, and healthy environment. In a multipolar world, a world driven by the race for prestige and power, this right remains elusive. The pursuit of short-term gains and narrow interests comes at a significant cost. And the real concern is how high these costs may be. It is therefore our duty, especially for small and medium-sized nations, not to remain silent, not to wait passively for the outcome of major power rivalries, and not to stand idly by in the face of global crisis and growing inequalities. By breaking the silence, we must speak out much more often and louder about the challenges we face. Challenges that require nothing less than intergenerational reflection. On this occasion, I would like to focus the debate on the implementation of the policy of inclusion in the processes and relations of the international community. Without inclusion, a peaceful future for us all is difficult to imagine. And let me quote here, ladies and gentlemen, my dear friend, the Finnish president, Alexander Stubb. He was an ex-foreign minister of Finland. And when he had a lecture at Norwegian University on his official visit to Norway, he was discussing about 3 C's, the letter C. He said that in the past, in the Cold War, we were in the period of conflict, so that's the first C. Now, we are close to be in the era of wider conflict again. But it looks that this is powered by the era of competition. That's the second C. But the third C, we should all look forward to and think about, is cooperation. Cooperation among countries, among nations, among individuals. And that's the future I want to see. So discussing the policy of inclusion means discussing its implementation at the neighborhood, regional, and global levels. When it comes to neighborhood, 2 points must be made. First, mutual relations. When considering its lyrics, the Slovenian national anthem, a toast, Zdravljica, as we've already heard, could in fact be an anthem for the world. It says, "No more shall foes, but neighbors be." Stable relations between neighboring countries mean close economic cooperation, open borders, and above all, ladies and gentlemen, trust. Looking at the politics today and the international relationships, I see the lack of trust, and it scares me sometimes. Second, The conditions for such good mutual relations must be ensured. A prerequisite for this is respect for other countries' territorial integrity. This is a fundamental principle of international law and essential for peaceful relations between nations. Without respect for this principle, international relations cannot be viable, and not only between neighbors, but between any other countries. And let me give you one data, ladies and gentlemen. There is no single country in this world which would be totally ethnically pure or clean. Not a single one out of 206. So this is why it is so important to respect minority rights, to respect other cultures, to respect other people, no matter the color of the skin or whatever other circumstances. So not a single country on this planet is ethnically clean. And it will never be that way. And that's good, because it brings variety to our lives. In the European Union, we need to place particular emphasis on discussing integration at the regional level. From the EU's perspective, enlargement, meaning the accelerated accession of candidate countries on the basis of expected and consistently implemented reforms, is a crucial political, economic, and geostrategic issue. For the majority of the population in the candidate countries, the EU is a factor of stability and a guarantee for a democratic future based on the rule of law and the protection of human rights, including minority rights. Clearly, the European Union expects candidate countries to fulfill all the conditions required for membership, as has been required also of previous candidates. However, it is important to emphasize that the burden and responsibility for successful enlargement is a shared one. Candidate countries, member states, and European institutions must all contribute to this common endeavor. Indeed, delays in the enlargement process, for whatever reason, risk fostering disappointment, opposition to the EU, and a tendency among the populations of the candidate countries to seek or accept alternative paths of development. Unfortunately, the enlargement process is still progressing slowly. This is why young people from the Western Balkan countries, for example, are leaving. The brain drain index in these countries is extremely high. And those who remain are vulnerable to the influence of the non-EU actors. The experience of the recent elections in Georgia and Moldova speaks volumes. It is not enough to simply acknowledge that both countries have been targets of malicious disinformation campaigns and other destabilizing activities by global actors in our neighborhood. Above all, we need to reflect on whether we can afford to keep these young people waiting another 20 years or more for the next wave of European Union enlargement. Whether they can be excluded without risking worse consequences for the region and Europe as a whole. And ladies and gentlemen, whenever I discuss European Union accession and the enlargement, as I assented in this speech, the burden is shared. But I think that also European Union is not honest enough in many occasions. This is why Slovenia is trying to persuade the friends among 27 member states to discuss the so-called qualified majority vote. In politics, this is really very significant and important. If we want to push the process, to make it faster, we have to make it easier for opening certain chapters. And the proposal of Slovenia and Germany is that for opening a certain chapter, the qualified majority should be applicable. So that not only one single country can block the whole process. I don't know whether you can imagine how hard it is to change the name of the country. This is what happened to North Macedonia. And North Macedonia was assured that after this agreement with Greece, the enlargement process is going to be faster. But then Bulgaria stepped in. Now they have to change the constitution. So there are always new obstacles in front of some countries. Of course, let's be honest, the reform processes are not fast enough in many of the Western Balkan countries. So the burden is on both sides, on the countries which try to enter the European Union and also on European Union itself, on all 27 member states. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that inclusion is equally important also at the global level. As a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, Slovenia is aware of this. We actively engage in discussions with all nations, stressing in particular the vital importance of respect for international law, including humanitarian and human rights law, and all this is applicable to global relations. That is why the genocidal actions taking place in different parts of the world are unacceptable for Slovenia. Equally unacceptable is the failure to comply with international court decisions aimed at putting an end to such atrocities. Small and medium-sized nations are particularly vulnerable to such violence and indifference to international law, Slovenia included. During and before World War II, we were ourselves victims of fascism, Nazism, and foreign occupation. For us, the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War is a solemn reminder that we must commit to doing all we can to ensure that such horrors never happen to anyone else. We also recognize that in order to achieve a lasting peace, certain essential conditions must be met. This requires justice and equality in all areas. Equality must begin at the symbolic level. This is also the reason why Slovenia is seeking solutions to the shocking inequality and lack of women in the highest positions in international institutions, such as the United Nations. I don't know whether you are aware of the statistics, but this year we are having the 80th General Assembly of the United Nations. And only 4 times this assembly was presided by a woman, and 76 times by a man. So this is what we are discussing today. This is why, me personally, I am involved in the gender alternation proposal inside the United Nations. And when we discuss, ladies and gentlemen, the Second World War, it's never easy, for the generations today to see what was happening in the past. But we have to know the good and the bad sides of the history. What communism did in my country, what communism did to some of your people in Italy. That's the fact, and we have to accept it. What fascism did to Slovenia in Europe is also a fact, and we have to accept it. But we should not remain living in the past. We should look into the future. And if we want to see the future and do whatever is necessary to have a better future, then we have to reconcile. Reconciliation is a lengthy process. It's never easy. I can tell you this from Slovenian experience. In Slovenia, after the Second World War, around 8,000 people were killed outside of the trial proceedings because they were on the wrong side of the history. They were in the Domobran army who joined the German army. And the bones are still lying in caves around my country. And we still didn't find an appropriate place to bury all those bones and to say that this happened and that we have to go on and that we have to forgive, not forget, but we can forgive. The reconciliation process is also very hard to follow in the Western Balkan countries. They have their own problems as well. When I was invited to the Berlin process by Chancellor Scholz to Berlin to discuss the accession process of the Western Balkan countries, I openly said to all the representatives of the Western Balkan countries that they should think about 3 points to be successful in accession process. First of all, whatever you negotiate, if you're not successful, negotiate again. And if you're not successful, negotiate again and again and again. The second point is reconciliation among the people in this region. You know, Serbs and Croats are still not like friends. The dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade is still with so much obstacles and difficulties. And this is not the burden to pass on young generations. We have to think about it, how to do it. And the third point, when you reach the agreement, respect it to the last letter on that paper. It sounds easy. I know it's not. But that's the formula I believe in. And if I continue, however, the policy of inclusion must be discussed not only in the context of multilateralism, but also with a clear understanding of the reality of a multipolar world. After the end of the World War II, countries had to adapt quickly to the special status of the 2 superpowers. The same was true after the end of the Cold War. We understand what this means. Without the superpowers, globally important decisions cannot be made. Without them, discussions on how to ensure human dignity for all become impossible. Competition between them, or any exclusionary approach towards them, is counterproductive and cannot guarantee the creation of a predictable, stable international community, which is essential for effective cooperation in addressing global challenges. The future relations between the superpowers and the other countries must be shaped by honest dialogue, not by exclusionary monologues. The alternative to inclusion is therefore not exclusion. And I sincerely hope that many of you who are listening to me right now are worried that this is exactly what is happening to the world, to all of us, growing exclusion. This type of discourse is slowly but surely pervading all aspects of foreign policy. In technical terms, this is called isolationism. It is becoming increasingly common, resulting in growing distrust, dissatisfaction, the scapegoating of those seen as outside our communities, and finally, violence. This is what led us to the brink and then outbreak of World War II, the worst conflict the world has ever seen. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the reason why we have to fight against exclusion. In the dance of interests, led by the major powers and increasingly by influential, ultra-wealthy individuals, a third way will have to be found again. We must strive for a coalition of small and medium-sized nations that will advocate in international institutions for an inclusive international community based on the rule of international law and peaceful conflict resolution. As dictated by the Charter of the United Nations, the UN, as I said, has 193 member states. And ladies and gentlemen, the vast majority of them are small and medium-sized nations. Nations that stand to lose the most if a greater conflict breaks out. Their voice, our voice, can play an incredibly important role in the future international relations. Their motto, our motto, must be, if we wish to make progress, which requires peace and security, it is our duty and our right to not stay silent. It is our duty and right to come together with like-minded nations who refuse to be silent, who refuse to be collateral damage in the competing interests of larger countries. As heads of states, politicians, diplomats, and opinion leaders, let us focus on developing an inclusive, long-term vision rooted in the values that define our common humanity, regardless of our differences. This is why intergenerational reflections or agreements on the future of our civilization, whether on building peace, promoting economic cooperation, or protecting our environment and climate, should carry far greater weight than the many agreements to which we commit ourselves, but which we rarely implement fully or consistently. There is still time. I do believe there is still time. But if we do not come together, time will run out. And when it does, ladies and gentlemen, future generations will judge us for our lack of responsibility. And if I can just conclude with the content which is really very close to my heart, and it was explained by honorable professor of my previous work in the field of data protection, privacy, freedom of expression, right to access to public information. Today, as a president, ladies and gentlemen, I really do closely follow the development of modern technologies. It is very close to my heart, especially artificial intelligence. And as one of IT gurus once said, you know, artificial intelligence is nor artificial nor intelligent. It's all about human knowledge. Whatever artificial intelligence knows is because we know that. And I'm happy to live in European Union, despite the fact that some countries outside of European Union see European Union as over-regulated area. But when we discuss modern technologies, the regulation is highly needed. I was taking part as an expert in enacting GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which was quite a revolution in 2018. And there were a lot of lobbyists in Brussels to make this regulation weaker. This regulation holds a world record in number of amendments. 3,099 amendments were passed for the GDPR. If we saw in 2018 and 2015, when we started the work, that big high-tech companies were against the regulation. Today we see, not in all of them, let's be honest, that they are asking to regulate artificial intelligence because they know the dangers behind. And I think that European Union took the right approach. It's a three-step approach. First step is what is explicitly not allowed with artificial intelligence. And that's to profile people on public spaces. That's not to use artificial intelligence in automotive weapons. This is not part of the AI Act, let's be honest, because defense is not to be regulated as a common law in European Union, but United Nations are working on that. The second step is that artificial intelligence can be allowed, but if there are dangers behind, the system should be highly supervised. So supervision is necessary. If we want to have supervision, what is important? To have transparent algorithms. If we do not know what the artificial intelligence algorithms behind are, then even the supervision is not possible. And the third step inside this Artificial Intelligence Act is no dangers, it is allowed. So, and now the whole world is watching European Union, what we have done. And this Artificial Intelligence Act is going to be put into force in August this year for most of the companies which are using artificial intelligence. So let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen. I will try to say some beautiful words in Italian. Lo dico in questa nostra meravigliosa città di Napoli, che quest'anno celebra 2500 anni dalla sua fondazione e che da sempre è città di pace e di accoglienza e dico nostra perché mi ci sento ormai molto legata. Lo dico in questa nostra autorevole università che sin dalla sua costituzione nel lontano XVIII secolo persegue la pace attraverso la cultura degli insegnamenti linguistico-letterari e storico-artistici di paesi diversi, vicini e lontani. Molte grazie a tutti. And final word, allow me in Slovenian. Najlepša hvala vsem, hvala lepa vsem gostom iz Slovenije, ki ste prišli na to podelitev častnega doktorata. Izjemno sem počaščena. I will just translate. I just said thank you to all the Slovenian guests who came here to celebrate with me the presentation of this honorable doctorate. Hvala lepa, molte grazie. Thank you very much.